And what we're going to talk about today is Or Emet, which I may or may not be pronouncing correctly, and which is first of all, it has the finest tagline that I've ever heard. It's called A Home for Wandering Jews. That's really fantastic. It's a Minnesota Congregation for Humanistic Judaism. I ran into them first at the Day of Reason a couple of years ago, and in St. Paul at the legislature on the main floor, they get together for National Day of Prayer, and we get together in a somewhat smaller group underneath them in the basement for National Day of Reason, and people stop by and speak, and one of the sponsors and heavy participants in this is the Or Emet group. So let me introduce Allan. He's the current president of Or Emet, the Minnesota Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, a retired researcher. He's originally from New York State, but moved here nearly 50 years ago to attend the U of M graduate school. That would be at our satellite campus in the Twin Cities, main campus here in Duluth, of course. He received an MA in sociology and has worked for a variety of nonprofit organizations, such as the Hubert H. Humphrey Institute for Public Affairs, and most recently for Ramsey County. He's been a member of Or Emet for over 30 years. He lives in St. Paul with his spouse, Diane Warner, and Sam and Ted, who are two pampered felines. So please welcome and turn our attention to Allan Malkis.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks everybody for the invitation to speak to you today. I want to semi-apologize. I had it on my calendar and it fell off. And it was just by happenstance that I was browsing my email 30 minutes ago and saw Jim's reminder, which is very lucky. Otherwise, I might not be here right now. So my apologies for almost missing this. You may decide whether that's a good or a bad thing after I'm done or in the middle. So you heard a little bit about me. Or Emet is the Minnesota affiliate of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. And the organization started back probably in the 80s. There were a number of people of Jewish heritage who were attending the First Unitarian Society when Koren Arisian was the leader of that congregation. And they hosted a talk by the founder of Humanistic Judaism, Rabbi Sherwin Wein, who was a friend of Pastor Arisian's. And after that talk, the people who had grown up Jewish were inspired to form themselves into a club or an association, or if you know Hebrew, a chavurah. And they started meeting separately and started to consider themselves affiliates of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. It was sometime during that period when I first became aware of the group. So that was in the late 80s, but it wasn't until after Diane and I got married and we decided we wanted to join a Jewish organization that we became members in the early 90s. So the Society for Humanistic Judaism is a national movement founded by a former Reform rabbi, Rabbi Sherwin Wein, who found himself conflicted by a number of things. First of all, the reality of the Holocaust and the lack of any supernatural intervention to prevent it. And secondly, he found that he was saying prayers and conducting services that he didn't agree with. He didn't believe in what he was called to say as a Reformed Jewish rabbi. So he struck out on his own, and in the Detroit area, he founded a congregation, which was called at that time the Birmingham Temple, for Birmingham, Michigan, not for the one in the South. But he started this group, and then he started traveling around the country organizing like-minded humanistic Jews who didn't believe in the prayers and in the deity of traditional Judaism. So it's secular humanistic Judaism, which means we celebrate the culture, history, wisdom, experiences of the Jewish people. From a humanistic point of view, we have prayers, or what seem like prayers, in Hebrew, but the language has been tweaked so that they're humanistic and not theocratic, if you will. They don't mention God anymore. They substitute words that have to do with humans, humanity, colleagues, friends, but retain in some ways some of the forms of some more traditional Jewish ceremonies and celebrations. So we have a humanistic service for Rosh Hashanah, which is the new year, which is tomorrow night. We will have a humanistic tashlich ceremony, which is the ceremony of getting rid of casting off our misdeeds and errors and failures of the year. We'll have a Kol Nidre service, which is traditionally a service of memory of those who have passed and of taking vows, or let's say traditionally it's being released from vows we made that we weren't able to fulfill and promising to do better next year, all from a humanistic point of view. And then a service on Yom Kippur, the so-called Day of Atonement, which follows the day after Kol Nidre, and then there'll be a break the fast ceremony. So as I mentioned before we started the meeting, when I first joined Emet, we had one service during the high holidays, 10-day period. Now we have 4 or 5, which I think is a little excessive, but the will of the people, I guess. We have a wide variety of folks in Emet. We have people who are atheists, who are very open about it and very strongly minded about that. We have people who are agnostic. We have people who don't label themselves in any particular way, but they don't feel the need for God. We have people who say they are spiritual but not religious. So there's a wide spectrum. The organization started, as I said, in the late 80s, mid to late 80s. So we're now not quite 40 years old. We're putting together, with the help of a grant from the Minnesota, from the humanities arm of the state, we're putting together some video and oral histories from members of the organization, which we're going to compile. What we do is celebrate Jewish holidays in a semi-traditional but non-theistic manner. We have a Seder with Haggadah that we wrote ourselves that doesn't talk about miracles, but rather emphasizes the human agency of the people involved in the liberation. We have celebrations at most of the major and a few of the minor holidays. We have what we are very proud of, a Jewish cultural school, which meets once a month from September through June. We always take the summers off. And we have a couple of hours of instruction for children in 5 different age groups, from pre-kindergarten to the mitzvah age, that is the early teens. We hold humanistic the mitzvah ceremonies for both boys and girls. We are planning to develop an adult bar mitzvah program for those of us who were raised Jewish but never had a formal bar mitzvah, which is sort of exciting to me since I would fall in that category. We're affiliated, as I said, with the national group called the Society for Humanistic Judaism, which has some 20-odd associated groups. And we are extremely lucky to have among our members a young woman who is the daughter of a good friend of mine who grew up in our Jewish cultural school, came back to the congregation after her college years and became the leader of the school program, and now is a year or so away from being ordained as a humanistic rabbi. And we've actually tried to figure out our finances so we can pay her to act as the rabbi for our congregation, which is pretty amazing. And excuse me, just get rid of an unneeded notice there. So that's a sort of a broad introduction to Or Emet. The Hebrew means light of truth, not in a boasting way, but that emphasized the original founders' sense that human reason was the way to get at the truth rather than anything revealed from on high. There's also an international Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, which has affiliates in Israel and several other countries, I think in Canada, and I can't remember the others. They're the ones who conduct the rabbinic training program. And all those people who want to become humanistic rabbis go through a program that involves, they have to get a master's degree in a related field. They have to take classes, a certain number of classes offered by the Institute over a period of years that works for them. And in the end, they can become, I don't know if the right word is ordained, but at least certified as congregational leaders. So Rabbi Wein chose to set the Society for Humanistic Judaism up as a congregation-based movement, figuring that people wanted and needed a community that they could belong to, rather than just an association or an affiliation or a group that met, occasionally. He wanted the, not trappings, he wanted the mutual support, the friendship, collegiality, and caring that comes with a group of people who formally associate themselves and get together on a regular basis. Or Emet meets once a month, twice a month now. We usually have either Friday night or Saturday morning Shabbat meeting once a month. And when the Jewish Cultural School is held on a Sunday morning, we usually have an adult program at the same time. The last couple of years, because of COVID, we've been doing them remotely like this. We were hoping this fall to get back to meeting in person, but we're going to have one in-person meeting during the high holidays, and we're still trying to figure out if we're going to start on a virtual only basis for our presentations. Let me give you a brief idea of what our meetings are like. We have developed a format for a Shabbat service, which we have, as I said, either on a Friday night or a Saturday morning, where we actually have, you might call it a ritual, a series of steps that we take, all humanistic. We mention the holiday, or the idea that Shabbat is a day for reflection and taking a step back from the normal everyday cares and concerns of the world. We have a few modified Hebrew and English, I guess you could call them prayers in quotes. So there's a traditional sip of grape juice and symbolic eating of a piece of challah, with some recitations thanking the people who produce the grapes and the bread. We have a few ruminations and mentions of people who may need support from the community. We have songs. That takes about a half an hour. Then we have a program where there's a speaker, sort of like I'm speaking to you today. We'll have somebody come in and speak, sometimes on a topic of interest related to Judaism, sometimes on another topic of interest. So we've had presentations on Jewish communities in Greece. We've had presentations on the Jewish community in Africa. We've had presentations from political scientists about current events. We've had archaeologists. We've had philosophers. We've had entertainers, musicians, a wide variety of presentations. We have touched on the hot point issue of Israel-Palestine numerous times. We often draw on the experiences and talents of our own members, but we also often bring in speakers from outside. I'm blanking on his name, but there's a political science professor who you may often see on Twin Cities Public TV, who's often a commentator. We get him in occasionally. We get other people who are knowledgeable and interesting speakers. They are sometimes controversial. And since we're a Jewish organization, there's always a great deal of give and take, questions and answers after the presentation is over. We're almost all volunteer. Our Jewish Cultural School pays a director and people who serve as teachers. We are paying our rabbinic candidate for the work that she's doing. We don't have a building. We rent space when we meet in person. We rent space from other Jewish institutions in the Twin Cities. We try to divide our meetings between the Western and Eastern Metro. So we have one meeting at the Jewish Community Center in Golden Valley, and we have one meeting a month at the Talmud Torah in St. Paul, because we have people from across the metro area. We've been lucky enough in our virtual years here to have people from around the country tune in, who get wind of us one way or another. We have had, one of the reasons my wife and I joined Emet was that she was raised Catholic. She's no longer Catholic, but she doesn't particularly want to convert to Judaism for any reason. And as an intermarried couple, we were not particularly welcome, or didn't feel particularly welcome at any of the synagogues we checked into. When we went to Emet, we found out that almost every other couple at Emet were people who were, where one member had been raised Jewish and one hadn't. That's no longer true, but it's still the majority. And it was the most welcoming. So we have had at least 3 presidents who were not born Jewish or converted, but who have been accepted as full members of the congregation and had the opportunity to be president, mostly because nobody else wanted it, but they did good jobs. We have a commitment to trying to keep the heritage of Jewish culture and ideas alive. My personal commitment, coming from a radical, political, non-religious background. My grandparents were in the garment workers unions. They were socialists and communists. My parents were not really synagogue goers. My grandfather used to complain when I was a hippie and had a beard that I looked too much like an Orthodox rabbi. And I want to preserve that strand of Jewish culture and history and legacy and promote it for the future. There are many others who feel very strongly that they're Jewish in culture and in background, but they're not religious. They don't believe in God. They don't pray to God. And they want a place where they feel comfortable being Jewish without needing to pretend that they're praying or counting on some supernatural power. And I think that's true for pretty much everybody in the congregation, but it's a spectrum. I think most of the founders were what I would call hardcore atheists, and that a lot of people who joined later are agnostic to spiritual but not religious. I have a little bit of spirituality in my life, but the spiritual language that speaks to me is not the traditional Jewish language, but it's actually the language used in Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist. I don't practice. I don't pray. I don't meditate. But I find the teachings about morality and how to live and things like that in terms that make sense to me in that language. So what I have of spiritual interest gets fed by that. But I'm not a Buddhist. As I said, I haven't joined any Buddhist communities, and I would not give up being Jewish. Let's see, what else can I tell you? I'm not sure there's a whole lot more that I can tell you. I think maybe I would like to stop here and throw it open for questions.
It's fantastic. Thank you, Allan. That's a really helpful introduction and reflects a lot of the kinds of things we think about, where we want to keep some kind of friendship, tradition, and fellowship without involving magic. First of all, I think it's Michael Osterholm you were thinking of. Is that true? Who comes and speaks of
No.
politics?
No, he's the
He's
climatologist.
He's the epidemiologist, yeah.
Oh, I'm thinking of COVID all the time. Yes, sorry. Do you still have cantors singing that beautiful music?
No, we don't. We occasionally have some men from the congregation who choose to sing during the services. We have a woman who is a good singer who is our song leader, but we don't have a cantor as such.
Okay, and the last question or comment from me, this weekend we're celebrating Pride here in Duluth, even though everyone else celebrates it in June. We do it over this long weekend. And so our concept of a mixed couple might include people who dare to marry the other gender and try their best to get along. I've certainly found that difficult over my life. So we have amongst us many people who I'm sure have questions and or comments for you, and let's let them have at it.
Please.
I'll raise my hand. I think what your organization has a lot of what we lack, even though we're trying to somewhat in the same direction. This attachment that you've kept with rituals, I think is really, really important. I don't know how we would ever have rituals. Maybe we do, but they're a form of identity that I think gives people some kind of security. Everybody wants to feel like they belong, and that I think rituals help that a lot. The other thing I noticed was your founder, when he went through the angst, I suppose, of saying things he didn't believe anymore. Sometimes I call that like he was bothered by not having enough integrity that he could live with himself. And I don't, now that integrity is being challenged by how many clicks you get, which depends on how much advertising you get, which depends on how much income you get. I kind of associate that with how much integrity there is left in the country. I think it's diminished a lot because you can get paid very high amount of money for just keep saying stuff that you really don't believe yourself, but it really gets a lot of attention.
You can even become president that way.
Yes, exactly. Although I wonder if he actually does not believe what he says. Go ahead.
Let me respond. Yeah, let me respond to the first part of your comment about ritual. When I first joined Emet, there was no ritual. There was no service. We did have a Seder, We only had one ceremony for the high holidays. And sometime during the next 15 or 20 years, as we started to get more members. So when my wife and I joined in the 90s, so we were in our 30s and 40s, everybody else, and there were about 10 other couples, everybody else was older than we were. And they were almost all people who had come out of that Unitarian Universalist background. Even if they'd been raised Orthodox Jewish, they had totally rejected that. And they didn't want services as such. They didn't really want much ritual. But it was later, as our congregation expanded, which was a good thing, because otherwise we would have died out, literally. But as we expanded, we got people who were not religious, but wanted the forms. They wanted the rituals that they were familiar with from growing up in a conservative or Reform congregation. And we gradually adopted more of that. I remember sitting on the committee to help write our Shabbat service and other things, and it was not what I would have chosen. So we used to start like you start, with some announcements, with some, maybe somebody would share a reflection, and then we would go right into having our speaker. Now, as I mentioned, we have that half-hour service of the sort, the ritual that starts our meetings. On Shabbat, on the Sunday meetings, when the adult program coincides with the Jewish Cultural School, we have a song, we have a sort of a, in quotes, blessing for children before the children go off to their cultural school classes. And that takes about 10 or 15 minutes, but then there's no other program. There's no ritual associated with it. We go right into having our speaker. But we have definitely changed from when I first got familiar with the organization. And there's more ritual than I feel necessary, but it seems to be working. And for the larger congregation that we have now, if it's working, if it's not broken, we're not fixing it. Sorry, long answer, but please, I'd welcome any other questions.
What sort of topics do you discuss in the cultural school classes for the kids?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer it. We don't have children. We never had any children go through the school. I know that there has been an attempt to put together a curriculum. Children are taught the Hebrew alphabet. They get some musical instruction. They learn songs, mostly those we use in our services. They get some introduction to history of Jewish history. They do not get taught the biblical stories, I don't believe. They get, as they get older, as I said, some discussion of Jewish history. They learn about the different holidays and cultural traditions. I think that's the most I can say. When they are old enough, so around somewhere between 12 and 13, if they decide to prepare for a bar mitzvah ceremony, they will do some in-depth research into a topic. Topics that I recall people have done include looking at portrayals of anti-Semitism in American and European literature and media. They've looked into, one person did a video history of Emet by interviewing some of the older members. People have done artistic presentations. So there's quite a variety of topics that they've taken up. And I'm sorry, I can't be more specific about what's in the curriculum.
That's great. Can I just ask you quickly, Seder means a Passover meal, is that correct?
Yes, the Seder is the Passover meal. The word Seder actually means order,
Ah,
in the sense that there's an orderly set of things that you do. And the Haggadah is the telling, or the book that's used during the Seder to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt and the liberation supposed. When we do our Seders, the Haggadah usually points out that there's no clear evidence historically or archaeologically for the event, and that there's controversy over whether it ever really happened. But we focus a lot on the theme of freedom and liberation and how that applies to the present day.
okay, thanks. I have two more words. Shabbat Shalom, usually we think of children giving a performance to start the Sabbath. Is that pretty well accurate? That kids do what they want?
In the Jewish Cultural School, which is on a Sunday morning, there's a sing-along. There's a sort of an ABC type song that goes for the Hebrew alphabet, that the students in the school are with the adult congregation. We do that together. We usually do another song. And then there's as I said, the blessing for the children. And then they go off to their classes. For the Shabbat services, there's no particular role for children, and usually children don't attend when they're in person anyway. They're usually in the evening. They used to be on Friday evenings after dinner. Many families with young children couldn't attend or didn't. Now that they're virtual, children are more likely to be involved, but there's nothing much of interest for them in that.
Okay, thanks. And the last thing is, we used to have a bar mitzvah for boys and a bat mitzvah for girls, and now the politically correct thing is bar mitzvah. Is that correct?
That's how we use it, yeah.
Tremendous, thanks. Next, by the way, just for everybody, next month when we're going to hear Dave Swinson come back, excuse me, and talk about vax deniers, whatever they're called, anti-vaxxers. He's going to help us understand better the psychology of these folks and maybe help us work with them. That's what we're going to be doing next month live at the Scholastica College. But I'm sure there are many, many more questions for Allan.
Yeah, Allan, I'm trying to, sorry, go ahead, Bill.
How many members do you have in your group?
I believe we have 40 some household members. And as I said, it used to be 10 households way back when. So one of the things that happened was by opening the Jewish Cultural School program, we got younger people with children to join, and many of them have stayed on as members even after their children graduate from the Jewish Cultural School, which is nice. And we've had a few children who graduated come back and join us after their college years. But I'd say there's about 40 or so families. And then there are a number of, we have a list of folks who visited who aren't members, but they've come to some of our programs, and we try to keep them involved. We have a Facebook page, we have a website. I think we have a Twitter account, but I'm too old to know what that's like. And oh, by the way, my birthday is September 21st, and I would very much like the complete set of all Grateful Dead concert recordings, so keep that in mind. Sorry, next question. Bill?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't put myself on
Bill.
mute. Yeah.
Bill with the hat.
What? Oh, I thought you said you don't have any children in your school, but.
No, I personally don't have any children.
Oh, you personally, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
Sorry
I
for the
will.
confusion.
I will ask a question unless someone else wants. What I sense that you have that we don't have is more of more emotional content to what you do than what we do here. We're lacking. Maybe we're not, but for me, we're lacking emotional content. We don't. We claim we're a support group, but we don't even know each other that well. We don't have a time when somebody comes and tells us their life story or anything like that, which I think is not helpful. And then this, well, you know what? I'll just stop right there. That's it. That's enough for now. Thank you. I'll go mute here.
Yeah, I think you're correct that one of the things that we've fostered by adopting this congregational model is that sense of community and caring. So we have a caring committee. We do reach out to people who may need assistance. We set up a couple of times this past year a meal train, if you know what that is, for someone who was ill or incapacitated and needed folks to help bring food in. We have a welcoming committee that tries to make sure that people who have contacted us, somebody reaches out to them and tries to get them involved. I think that was, as I said, I think that was Sherwin-Wine's intention when he set up the organization nationally, and I think it's a pretty good choice. I think the original group was very heavily focused on, the Enlightenment and rationality and science saves us from everything. I think that's broadened as the congregation has grown and a wider spectrum of people have been involved. I don't know that that's good or bad. It depends on your perspective. There's still a great deal of focus on the individual, but also on the community of humankind. So it's not just rugged individualism. It's that human beings working together in community can solve problems and have to do so together, because we can't sit around and pray for help from above.
That's always been my assumption, is that when people don't have a God in their life, they sort of come to a place where eventually they think, oh, that's right, all we have is each other. That's it. Whatever. We're not here for any reason or purpose we know of, but let's do it together, kind of thing. Yeah.
I think your group is a model for what all religious congregations should do.
And many of them do a lot of the things we do and more, but they do it with this theological framework, which we've decided isn't necessary.
I think David Cole has a question.
And then Linda.
Well, I'm thinking about whether we could borrow anything from the idea of having ritual or music or recitations. I'm thinking the latter might work the best, where I can remember from church services, including UU ones, they often have everybody read something in unison. And it gives you a kind of feeling of bonding to the other people who are chanting along with you.
Mm-hmm.
And there are kind of mission statements where we believe in free inquiry, that kind of thing, that everybody could recite together that wouldn't be leaving somebody out, analogous to a creed. But I'm also reminded that there's an important difference between us and you folks, and that is that we both have a negative side, something that we reject, but we don't have a shared, in our group, we don't have a shared positive thing that we want to keep alive, other than this sort of Enlightenment emphasis on rationality and science. But I think we could do recitations. I like music in a service. It's really cool. Even if you just listen to something. When I was a kid, I went to a Unitarian church that played music. They played recordings of somebody would pick a recording and they would have some music in the background. We're music free as a group usually.
I will say that we have a member of our congregation. We've had two members of our congregation, one has passed, who were good pianists and who we have the opportunity to have a piano at our services that are held at the Jewish Community Center. And we usually have piano music accompanying the singing. And we try to sing a lot of the same songs so that everybody gets to know them. I agree that having a shared recitation and having music can be helpful in building that kind of sense of community. I think that's a really good point. It takes organizing, it takes people with some talent and willingness to do it together. And what we've done is we've rewritten the words to traditional Jewish songs so that they're not offensive to us, and tried to make them non-sexist and non-theological, and it seems to work because we get used to them. People coming in from elsewhere who are used to the traditional ones may think they're singing the same song, and then they're like, wait a minute, what was that word? But because we repeat it, we get used to it. But thank you for the comment.
A great
Linda,
model for this is the American version of God Save the Queen.
Yeah, right. Linda, you wanted to ask a question?
No, just a comment. Well, actually, there is a question. I did want to say that it's been a really valuable presentation and coming away with all kinds of really great ideas that
Thank
we
you.
can steal a page from your playbook here. But I was just curious about how you support yourselves financially. Do you have dues-paying members or
Yes.
get grants?
We have dues for a family. I think the dues are currently about $350 a year. Then there's more if the children are attending the Jewish Cultural School. People who have difficulty with that level of payment, it's less for an individual. And people who have trouble paying can make arrangements with the treasurer to pay a different rate. There are some kids who attend school and their parents don't get around to paying. We try to politely and gently harass them into doing so, since we're paying for the school. But one of the things we decided to do, which was one of the best ideas we ever had, was that we would support the school. Everybody, whether they had children in the school or not, would support the school from our general funds and subsidize it. And that was, I think, the reason that we were able to survive and grow. I would encourage anybody who wants to look at both our website, which is simply Emet, OREMET.org, or to look for the Society for Humanistic Judaism website. Sherwin Ryan wrote several books. He wrote Judaism Without God. He wrote History of the Jewish People, the name of which I'm forgetting right now. And those books are available possibly even in your local library. If you look them up on the SHJ website, you might be able to then find them somewhere that you could get a hold of. And because we're doing a lot of our programming virtually, or at least hybrid, you can, if you wish, sign up to attend one of our services or meetings. You may find them interesting. So I'm sorry. Bill, did you have another?
I wanted to ask, what response do you get from the standard Jewish community?
We used to get none. And now I think as we've persevered, we've continued to exist. We are getting more involved in the larger Jewish community. We are sometimes invited to events. We are most often included in listing of Jewish activities around town. Although this year, one of the main, there's a group called Twin Cities Jew Folk, which has a calendar of events. And this year they left us off their list of high holiday services, although we had sent them an announcement. But after we contacted them again and reminded them that they had left us off, they put us on, which was nice. So it's grudging acceptance, I would say. I know there are a lot of people who don't consider us Jews because we're not theistic. But I know there are a lot of people like Rabbi Wein. I mean, if you look at surveys of American Jews, if you're not talking about the Orthodox, something like 50 to 60% say they don't really believe in God, but they keep going to their synagogue and singing the traditional songs and reciting the traditional prayers because it's traditional. So you've seen Fiddler on the Roof, right? Tradition. And that's why we say a home for wandering Jews is our local tagline currently. And because there are Jews who have never been members of anything organized. Or they were when they were kids and they've drifted away and they don't know that an alternative exists. Anyway, another long answer, sorry. Linda?
I was just wondering what your legal status as an organization is. Are you a nonprofit or even a church, perhaps?
We're a nonprofit. I don't know if we're registered as a religious institution or not. I do know that we have had several people who were not certified religious leaders who got permission to conduct, licenses to conduct marriages. We currently have one, and when our rabbinic candidate finishes her work, I'm sure she will get a certificate also.
I have another question if nobody else does. Well, I guess it's more like an observation. I was married once to a Jewish lady who, and I got introduced a lot to her family and holidays and stuff. One of the things I understood about the Jewish culture more out east is when there was a gathering of people, there were people calling each other their uncles and cousins who were not really uncles and cousins. They were like, in their younger day, they were sent out of Europe to be safe here and just kind of migrated into other people's families and then couldn't go back because there wasn't anything to go back to. So that was one thing. And then when you said you have presentations and you have questions and answers, I was surprised you said answers, because when I hung around with a lot of Jewish people, even the answers were questions. What you think I should, it's like, it never, it was like the quest for getting to the end of something wasn't as strong as the culture I came from. And I found it very amusing and kind of enlightening, actually, that there was less of a want to get to a concrete, permanent decision, or did I understand that correctly? Have you seen that in your culture? What I'm talking about? It's kind of weird.
I have seen it. I grew up on the East Coast, so I'm somewhat familiar with that culture as well. I guess when I said questions and answers, I meant like we're doing now, where the speaker responds to people in the congregation or the audience. I don't know that there are definitive answers. As we know in science, all answers are provisional and subject to being overturned with new evidence. We don't always act that way as human beings. We're often pretty convinced that our answers are right. I certainly am guilty of that a lot myself, but I think that there is a Jewish tradition of questioning. I'm not particularly familiar myself with traditional Jewish texts, but my understanding of texts like the Talmud are that there's an awful lot of back and forth and not a lot of settled opinions. It's a game where you try to come up with something that somebody else didn't think of.
I think it's the reason why you don't have a pope, in a way.
But interestingly, the ultra-Orthodox have many popes.
Mhm.
Each sect has its own, I guess. The other bill.
To what extent do your members feel a hostility towards the superstitious and toxic elements of religion?
I think it varies. Some feel that very strongly. Some feel that more loosely. They wouldn't be part of our congregation if they didn't feel that it was not necessary in their lives. But I think the level of antagonism varies considerably. So, yeah, as I said, the people who founded the group, I think, were militantly anti-theistic. I don't think that's necessarily true of the current membership and leadership. Although there are exceptions. There are some people who are still very, I had an interesting argument with a friend who's a contemporary of mine in age, and she was vehement that children should not be taught any of the traditional Bible stories or learn about the Bible or any of that, because it was all just superstition. To which I responded that I thought it was important for people to be familiar with some of the common literary heritage of both Jews and Christians, and that it would be helpful to them in later life for understanding what other people were talking about. Not that it be taught as truth, but that it be taught so that they were familiar with it. So if somebody says, you know, like King David and Bathsheba, they would have an idea of what they were talking about, because that's in the culture and you can't make it go away. But that's just my personal opinion. And I don't believe that our cultural school teaches those traditional tales at all. But I'm not sure I would object if they did in the right context. David?
There was once a time when the data showed that atheists knew more of the Bible and what it said than true believers, and that's kind of what you're getting at there.
Mm. I
Yeah,
think
I don't know
so.
if that's true anymore.
By the
Alan,
way, Alan, the title of the book is Provocative People.
Provocative
History.
people, thank you.
Right. It doesn't always come right to the mind.
Yeah.
We probably have time for a couple more questions, but in the meantime, I want to just say on behalf of everybody, thank you. We wish you could come around a lot more often, because we, compared to you, we are a very fledgling organization. Bill with the hat is the person, or one of the two people, I guess, him and Dale Hagen, who really got this rolling. And they've done a lot of stuff over the last 20 some years. But in terms of broadening out and figuring out how to bring in especially younger people, we are just beginning to think about those things.
Well, that's our struggle too. We constantly need to be bringing new people in. We do have a very large group of us who are, you know, I'm turning 70, so a lot of people my age and older have been doing leadership roles. And we rely so much on volunteers that we really need to bring up a new generation of leadership. So that's a big focus. I've just started my term as president, and that's one of my focus areas is leadership development, I hope.
Super. I really want to compliment you also on many things that your organization is doing that aren't your preference, but yet you are in support of them. This is what we call in business school, we call this leadership. And I think that's very impressive. Does anybody have a new topic they want to bring up, a question about?
I do.
Dave Cole.
I did want to ask about a couple things about the group. One is it roughly, what's the male-female ratio of people who show up at meetings? And secondly, of the subpopulations of Jews, like Sephardic and Ashkenazim, is it almost exclusively the latter that people would cite as their heritage? And finally, since everybody's always looking for members, what have you found is effective for letting the world know you exist?
I would say the male-female ratio is probably fairly equal. There are a lot of extremely active women and younger women in the organization. They take on a lot of leadership roles. I think the role of president has been more recently male, but it's partly because a lot of the women have already done their terms. I avoided being president for many years by being on the nominating committee, but once I retired, I felt I didn't have any excuse anymore. It's almost exclusively Ashkenazi, and so one of my, which means Jews of European descent. So one of my other initiatives during my term as president is to try to broaden our understanding of the Jewish community and its diversity. Not necessarily that much in the Twin Cities, but there are. We had a very interesting panel a year or two ago about Jews of color. And they exist, but they don't feel very welcome. And I heard a heartrending presentation by an Asian woman who was president of a New York City congregation, or rabbi, I guess, in a New York City congregation, who said she had an African-American congregant come to see her and say he was quitting because when he comes to services, people ask him if he's Jewish, why he's there, and the security guards follow him around. So we're not exempt from the racist assumptions that permeate the rest of our society. Finally, what are we doing to make ourselves better known? We have a person, a staff member who we pay to, we have a person we pay who works part-time putting out press releases for us. We have, as I mentioned, a Facebook account, a website. We advertise our programs in both the major newspapers, but more successfully in the smaller suburban papers in the Twin Cities area. And we often get people coming in because of that. We sometimes get people who find us through the National Society for Humanistic Judaism website, but we really have to do a better job. And we do have for the third or fourth time, we have a publicity committee that's trying to think about how to do that. So those are my answers for those interesting, good questions.
Thank you.
Bill with a hat, any closing words?
No, but thanks a lot, Alan. Very, very informative.
I want to mention our founding members. Harold Launder, who was an oncologist who worked here in the Twin Cities, who passed away about a year ago. And, oh God, what was his first name? Larry Garfin, who was a pediatric dentist who passed away, unfortunately, 30 years ago, were the two people who really started and founded this congregation. And Harold served for most of his adult life as our spiritual leader. He had a certificate as a madrich, which is a Hebrew term, which I think means leader of some sort. But it's an official role that the Society for Humanistic Judaism has. People who want to be a madrich go through a training period and take a bunch of classes and write a paper, and they get a certificate. They're not rabbis, but they're sort of the step below being a rabbi. And many congregations have people like that. Harold did that for us for many years. And it was a great loss when he himself was stricken by illness, and we lost him last year. But those are people who are responsible for there being a congregation like ours at all. So I want to thank you again so much for having me here. It was a privilege to be able to talk to you. And please check out our website and other information if you're interested. And I'm sure that in the future we could have someone else speak to your group.
Great, thank you very much. And
Thank you.
Everybody remember, in October, we'll be live again at St. Scholastica. Please bring a friend and come on down to hear David Swenson talk about the psychology of anti-vaxxers